core from the log.
Amazing. Ooh, it's warm.
You can blow the sawdust away.
Ooh. I dropped the core. Still good.
Okay, well, let's take that
Turns out this little sample carries an amazing amount of information.
Tell me what we got.
Yep. Let me show you what we just did in there. This is a cross-section of another Chaco bean. So this core is dated by matching the ring width variability in this sample to ring width variability in this one.
So each, let me sure I get this, each ring is a year.
Each ring is a year. Big rings mean wet years. Small rings mean dry years.
And then by laying this core sample against it,
we can
find out
where the core sample
where this goes in
is.
the years.
That's right.
And then how do we know what year we're looking at? Is there a master chart that we lay this against?
Yes, this is part of the master chart, and this series of ring widths in here are compared to those. And once you find a match, you can date the core.
Thousands of core samples taken all over the Southwest add up to produce a graph charting the annual rainfall from 450 AD to the present.
So looking at this, was drought the cause of the Chaco decline?
Well, there was a major drought, and a lot of people think that drought caused the abandonment of the canyon and the collapse of the system.
Do you think so?
Well, I think it was part of the equation, but there are other factors involved as well.
What were the others?
I think it was a combination of drought, adverse conditions in the floodplain, plus the high population. Obviously, these ruins represent a large number of people, so you have these three factors that combine to trigger the abandonment of the canyon.
Drought has always been a fact of life in the Southwest. The people of Chaco Canyon had weathered bad droughts before. And Jeff's tree ring data show that those droughts didn't stop the ambitious building. But in the 1100s, the drought did. Chaco is an eerie place with its own mysteries. Like, how did its priests become powerful enough to get this huge ceremonial center built? Archie Hansen said one theory is that Indians came north from Mexico. Some archaeologists think that they took over Chaco, terrorizing the people. I've been to Mexico. I know that the Toltecs and the Aztecs practiced bloody rituals of human sacrifice. I've seen the skull racks they'd fill with the remains of their enemies. Maybe this could explain why cannibalism suddenly appeared in Anasazi history. But it's just a theory. If only these stones could talk. But the Anasazi left us no written records. Was Chaco the scene of grisly rituals that spread throughout the Anasazi world? Today, some archaeologists are seeking answers to Chaco's mysteries in the smaller communities which help supply the great city. Dr. John Kantner and his archaeology students from Georgia State University are digging at one of these ruins. I'm hoping John will be able to tell me more about what happened at Chaco.
What is this site that you guys are excavating?
Well, this is a small household. This community here, which we call Blue Jay Community, probably had 3 dozen of these small households, maybe 4 dozen of them.
And Chaco is 50 miles,
yeah,
give or take.
It's right, exactly.
That way.
Exactly.
How then does this site give you clues into the rise and fall of Chaco culture over there?
Chaco Canyon has very little of its own in the canyon. There is a little bit of water there. They certainly could support some farming. But as far as other resources, there's just not a lot that's there. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's one of the most desolate places you'll find in the entire Pueblo and Southwest. These communities over here are much better positioned. It's a bit wetter here. There's more raw stone materials. There's more wood. And so these people here were the ones that were carrying a lot of the goods into Chaco Canyon to fuel it. Everything that Chaco did had to be fueled by people coming from outside of the area. People in small villages just like this.
So the people here have what they need.
People here have what they need, exactly.
And what does the Chaco culture have that these people need?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's what we're sort of trying to figure out exactly. I think that most archaeologists would agree that Chaco eventually becomes a pretty powerful pilgrimage center, one espousing a religious belief that these people seem to adhere to.
What the Chacoans' religion was, nobody knows for sure. Many archaeologists believe it had a dark side. That could explain the instances of cannibalism and why people would walk 50 miles just to get close to its power.
People believe so much in whatever it is that Chaco is doing that they're willing to carry goods to Chaco, fuel its very existence. And then I think Chaco Canyon began to do what anthropologists call materialize that religious belief system. And by materializing, what they do is they create things. You create things, and if those things are important for the religious belief system, for the rituals, for the ceremonies, then that means that it can be controlled. Other people need those things. Turquoise and shell, and for people out here, they felt they needed those things. And so in order to get those things, they had to go there, and they probably then brought things to Chaco Canyon in exchange for just a little piece of that belief system, a little piece of the religion that they can bring back here to their small communities and then help to fuel what they thought was going to be success here.
As I look around John's dig, I'm reminded again that archaeology is painstaking work, piecing together answers from bits of pottery, turquoise, and bone. The simplest of questions can often take years to answer, and even then there's always room for debate.
John, you've given me a good sense of how this community related to the Chaco culture, but how did it all fall apart?
Well, the priestly leaders of Chaco Canyon, their power and authority was based on a belief system, and that's really all they had. So it's really a house of cards, and if any of those cards are removed, then the whole thing comes falling down.
Which was the one card then that did that?
In the early 1100s, there was a drought. It was a relatively minor drought, particularly in comparison to other droughts that Puebloan people have experienced, but it probably was just enough to cause the problems. But essentially, there's a power vacuum, and that leads to a lot of social chaos.
But did social chaos mean violence? I asked John, was this what drove the Anasazi to take refuge in the cliffs?
In certain parts of the Puebloan world, that's exactly what happens. The violence and the strife that results from this power vacuum leads people to retreat into those kinds of refuges.
Moving north to places like Mesa Verde.
Exactly.
What John says makes sense. Think of the thousands of people abandoning Chaco, looking for shelter elsewhere in the Four Corners. Competition must have been fierce. It's not hard to imagine that it was brutal, too. It's time to put the pieces of the mystery together. But there's one last clue I need to explore. At John Cantner's dig, I learned that many archaeologists believe that the fall of Chaco Canyon around 1150 AD brought social chaos and violence to the Anasazi world. That's about the same time cannibalism peaked, and when Archie's Pueblo experienced its brutal massacre. Is this the answer to the Anasazi mystery of why they moved into the cliffs and then abandoned the Four Corners? Yet there's another side to this story. Indians to the south of the Four Corners claim to be descended from the Anasazi. The Pueblo, the Zuni, and the Hopi have their own oral histories about their ancient ancestors. I've spoken to one Hopi at Mesa Verde, Larissa Kumawana, who told me that the Anasazi moved to the cliffs to be closer to their water sources. Now I'm going to hear more of the Hopi side of the story.
I've come to southeastern Utah to the San Juan River to take a trip and take a look at their rock art. There's a few petroglyphs just downriver from us. And to see if I can get a feel for the culture, I've arranged for some Hopi elders to take a ride down the river with me. Hi. Hello. Are you Wilton?
Wilton Kuyabuhema and Dalton Taylor are elders from the Hopi Reservation in Arizona, south of the Four Corners. Dawa Taylor is Dalton's son.
Nice to meet you.
Native Americans who claim ancestral ties with the Anasazi are very hesitant to share their clan histories. It's private, and out of respect, I'm cautious with my questions.
Do you have a personal perspective on the Anasazi and what they did out here?
The Anasazi, I think there's one misunderstanding about the word Anasazi.
Yeah.
And in Hopi we call them Hisasino.
sensitive.
Yeah, people of the past.
The term Anasazi isn't exactly popular among people who claim to be their descendants. That's because it's a Navajo word that means ancient enemies. Today, many prefer to use the term ancestral Puebloans instead of Anasazi. We near a bend in the river. The elders are quiet, so I'm quiet too. But I'm hoping that the petroglyphs we'll soon see will be enough to set them talking. We pull up to take a look at some petroglyphs. Life-size figures pecked out by the ancient Anasazi 1,500 years ago. But they're just too old. The Hopi can't interpret them. Yet nearby are some other petroglyphs they find very familiar.
Looks like there's something right here.
Oh yeah, that's the spiral.
That's a spiral.
That's a migration story right there. Migration.
Maria, come on up.
So here, they occupy, it's the center where they occupied it, and when they go this way.
To the Hopi, the spiral means their people were once here, at this place in the Four Corners. To them, the Anasazi mystery is simply a story of migration. They abandoned the area because it was time for them to go, not because of social chaos or violence.
Looks like there's a head here.
It takes several hours, but I finally feel comfortable enough to ask Wilton the toughest question of all.
Wilton, were the Anasazi cannibals?
No, not really.
How do you know?
Because from the time when the migration started a long time ago, there is no enemies. Until the second group, like Navajos and these other Paiute, they're the ones that come in and doing the warfare with the Hopi people.
Because of this?
To the Hopi, there were no enemies before the Navajo,
It's not a new one.
and they didn't come to the Four Corners until long after the Anasazi were gone. But what if the enemy wasn't an invader?
And the other one is
I remember what Vaughn said to me on that remote ledge in Cedar Mesa.
My opinion, there was all sorts of conflicts going on. Probably, my guess is, among people living here, not outside forces necessarily. Some people do think that there was an outside influence of other people coming in and putting pressure on these people. But my guess is it's probably people, maybe in the next canyon over.
As I learned from Vaughn, Archie, and John Cantner, violence and probably warfare drove the Anasazi into the cliffs. But it's most likely that their enemy was none other than the Anasazi themselves. As for the second half of the mystery, the Hopi story of migration fits. The Anasazi didn't disappear. They simply left the Four Corners. The tree rings show that a great drought descended on this area in the late 13th century. Weary from decades of fighting, the survivors most likely did what their ancestors had done ages before. They migrated south to begin a new life. On our last stop, we visit the River House ruin. It was a sacred place for the ancient Anasazi. It still is for the Hopi today.
Be alert and wake up, people.
We make an offering of cornmeal. New evidence may one day settle the issue. But for now, archaeologists and modern Puebloans continue the debate, searching for clues left in the steep stone walls of America's Red Rock Canyons.